Hello and welcome to Tea and a Chit Chat Live. My name is Russell, which you probably know already, and you're watching for Chits and Giggles. Today, I am very fortunate to be joined by the lovely designer, publisher, and just all-round nice guy, Gil Hova.
Hi.
Hello.
Nice to see you all.
Thanks for joining. Oh, we've already had somebody saying hello. That's Crimmy Master. Hello. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you'll enjoy this. So the most important question, this is obviously a chat show with a single format point, and that is, what tea are you drinking there?
So, I'm sorry to disappoint everyone, but I don't like tea. I don't like coffee either. I'm drinking hot cocoa right now. As long as my background doesn't get there.
Oh, you got it in, yes. So just not a tea drinker, or you just much prefer cocoa?
Not a tea drinker or a coffee drinker at all. I'm a very, very fussy eater and drinker. I'm not proud of this. This is not by choice or decision. This is just the limbic system I was given.
No, that's totally fine. And do you know what? Surprising me, after doing quite a few of these chats, and I think we're up to like 16, 17 or something, how few people actually drink tea. Which is completely ruining my format, to be honest. But no, that's totally fine. I do want to mention that this live stream that I'm doing today is any subscriptions that I get, any ad revenue, anything like that, I will be donating to the Black Lives Matter charities. So if you have a free subscription or you donate or whatever you get, I will be donating that to Black Lives Matter. So yeah, feel free to contribute if you have some spare. But also, if you have any questions, because obviously this is a question and answer situation, and I'd like to maybe not have to ask all of the questions. So if you are watching and you feel, even if it's not board game related, maybe you just want to find out what his favorite book is, please feel free to ask them in the chat, and I'll get to those towards the end of the stream. So without further ado, let's get stuck in and ask a question. Now, you, as I mentioned at the top of the show, you do designing and a bit of publishing, but you're mainly a designer, right? That would be correct? That'd be fair to say? Okay.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm a designer who happens to publish games. I am much more of a designer than a publisher. I'm a worker who controls the means of production.
That's a good analogy. I like that. So based on that and the fact that you do a little bit of publishing on the side, but mainly designing, maybe what's sort of something about your career, your role, that maybe not a lot of people might know?
I mean, I'm pretty out there, you know. People pretty much know that that I self-published. I've been self-publishing my games since 2014. Like 2015 was when Bad Medicine came out, but I started Formal Ferret in 2014. Okay. I'm not really full-time. I'm kind of full-time, but I have a bunch of part-time gigs to help me out and that sort of thing. So I also teach game design at NYU, although my class in the fall got postponed.
Oh, okay. So you do a bit of teaching on the side. That's awesome. I've just Yes, I'm so sorry. I nothing wrong. I'm just realised that someone's told me that my I'm very much louder than you, so I'm just fixing that. I think that's fixed it, but let me know if that hasn't. Cool. Crimmy Master, by the way, asked, and I feel like I usually wait to thank you. I usually wait till the end of the thing to ask questions, but they've noticed your background, and so they wanted to ask you about that. Just I figured maybe if you explain, those leaving people hanging the whole time.
Well, I mean, rent in New York City is expensive, so you've got to find alternatives. Growing up, I was a big Doctor Who fan, and this was my TARDIS. You know, this was what I grew up with. Because I really started in the Peter Davison eras, and this is, I think, from '84. Okay. But that said, I'm not as much of a fan as I used to be. I think I really fell off during the Matt Smith, Peter Capaldi years. I think Jodie Whittaker's pretty good. I don't think her writers are giving her very much to work with, but I think she's doing as good a job as she can be expected. I don't like it when there's like 3 companions. I didn't like it in the Davison era. Now that I look back, I think that was not great. I know people are fans of the whole Adric Tegan Sarah thing. I'm not. I just thought it was too much going on, and I think it's too much going on now. I feel like it's one assistant with three heads, and they just can't devote enough time for stuff. But I don't know if things changed towards the end of the season. I kind of fell off the ball in the middle of the season. Every so often, though, oh, who's that really, really good writer that they have? He did the Jadoon episode with the big plot twist with the
Ooh.
uh,
I'm
yeah, that was I think earlier this season, and he also did the episode that was set at the Pakistan-India border when the border went
I
up.
was trying to find out for you. It was written by Vinay Patel and a current showrunner Chris Chibnall.
That's him.
There we
Yeah,
go. This is quite
yeah.
impressive. You obviously
He is
you're
amazing.
quite
Yeah, he's an
you're
amazing
obviously a
writer.
huge fan of like Doctor Who. Is that kind of like do you think that like when did you start watching? You said in the Davison era. So was that
Yeah.
one of your early sort of like geek like loves like like
Oh,
so that
absolutely.
do you think that may have kind of well actually let's talk about you're obviously interested in board games. One question actually, sorry, I'm kind of jumping all
Yep.
over the place, but this is generally how my
That's fine.
style
You're fine.
is,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Uh,
But I usually forget to ask this, but how like what's your earliest memory of like actually sort of playing and enjoying a board game?
my parents got this really cheesy kids game called Oh What a Mountain, and I think I was like 5, and I really wanted to play it with my parents, and my dad was too busy doing other
Okay.
stuff. That's my
Did
earliest
so
memory.
so based on the fact that obviously how old were you roughly when you played that? Was it around the same time as Doctor
That
Who?
was
Oh,
about
okay, so
5.
like very early.
No, no, that was much younger. I came across Doctor Who when I started getting into it when I think I was
Have
10.
you played
I think, yeah,
have
10
you
something.
played any Doctor Who board games?
Not since the really bad Games Workshop one in
Oh,
the
really?
80s. Like the one where everybody's a bunch of doctors and they fight each other. And Leela was called Layla. I mean, it was kind of a mess. But I haven't played any of the newer ones. Like I said, I'm not. So I did this thing recently.
Hmm.
This is going to be a bit of a rant here,
We love
but
rants.
I hope people get something out of it. I recently, a couple of years ago, renounced my
Oh,
fandoms.
okay.
There were a few things that I'm a fan of, but I'm no longer a fan of individual sports teams, no longer a fan of most TV shows. I'm not saying that fandom is bad, I'm just saying it's not for me. And especially in the case of sports, like, I really love sports so much more now. It just didn't feel good to have my identity
Hmm.
measured by something out of my control. That didn't feel great. I didn't like the person I was becoming. Whereas now I can watch like an American postseason or a tournament in Europe and not feel any like real life ramifications. I'm just watching something really
Wow.
dramatic. My friend I says her parents root for the ball, and I love that analogy. So that kind of applied to Doctor
Hmm.
Who. For a long time I tied my identity to Doctor Who, and I stopped. And I don't think that's any judgment on the show. I think it's just more that I would prefer not to. And I'm not saying that if you do tie your identity to a show or a sports
Hmm.
team, it's a bad thing, but it is something that you don't have to do. There's a lot of people who say you have to be a fan of one team. If you're a fan of two teams, especially in the same area, then you're not a real fan. And that's bogus.
I
That's not real.
I,
That's
I
that's
kind of agree
garbage.
with you. I mean, I would put it that I think it's kind of a bit random to choose a team or like thing, especially sports. Actually, I think the only time I've really put any thought into this is specifically about sports. But I've also thought it's very random to pick a team not from where you are, where you live, to support, because then it's just like, oh, you're just choosing and picking one that you're like. And I don't think there's not really a huge difference between like one major sports team and another. So I've always found it very weird. Like, I understand if I was born in Swansea, and so if I ended up supporting the Swansea football team, that would at least make sense, because it's a little bit of like, well, I may grow up with people, but to
Yep.
pick like Liverpool and support them, and as you say, tie your happiness and identity around that seems a bit quite as strong, doesn't it? So I definitely see where you're coming from in that, and I think it's quite nice. And on the other hand, I would say not watching. I can't imagine watching sports and not rooting for somebody, because that's always the time when I've ever watched sports, and I'm not actually a big sports fan. I like the occasional rugby. I watch a lot of international rugby, but only for Wales playing, because I kind of like their team, because again, I'm from Wales. And so how is that? Like, has it massively impacted it? Was it like kind of a shift to try and adapt to not actually supporting one specific team, just supporting good gameplay?
I mean, I always, when, like, for example, when baseball was on, I always liked watching other teams' broadcasts. It's like, ooh, this is like watching a different country. The weirdest thing, I'm from the New York area, and I grew up a Mets fan, which some wise asses might say that's part of the reason why I renounced my fandom. And I'll admit that, there's probably a little bit of truth to that, but it is more to do with I feel really bad when they win, because it felt like a lot of pressure to keep it going on something that wasn't under my control. The losing I could take. The losing was fine. It was the winning that was super stressful. But what I started doing is I started watching Yankees games, which for someone who grew up watching a lot of Mets games was weird, because the Yankees are supposed to be the evil empire. You're supposed to hate them. You're supposed to detest them. And it's like, that's stupid. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to be like, oh, well, I hate this team because I was trained to. That's not for me anymore. So I sort of started training myself, and I watched broadcasts of both teams. And still, I'm always going to have more of a connection to the Mets because I grew up with them. But, hopefully in a few years, I'll have enough of a connection to the Yankees as well that'll be like, okay, well, those are both my regional teams, but I don't really root for them either, Yeah. So it used to be that, if the Mets won, I was happy. If the Mets lost, I was sad. If the Yankees won, I was sad. If the Yankees lost, I was happy. That's a dumb way to live. Nowadays, Mets win, I'm happy. If the Mets lose, I'm happy. If the Yankees win, I'm happy. If the Yankees lose, I'm happy. Isn't that a much better way to live?
Yeah, I mean, I also find it it's funny that I see you're holding a baseball as well. I was like, I'm just wondering if you have a prop for every discussion topic we're gonna go through, because that'd be quite cool.
I have a couple of balls to just play with. So another thing I discovered, which was really super interesting. Like, I'm a huge baseball fan, and there had been times when I'd watch a doubleheader. Like, I would go to the stadium and I would watch a doubleheader, and the game would end. The second game would end, and I'd be like, "Ooh, I could deal with more." So a couple of years ago, I realized that a good antidote to baseball, like cricket. A good, not antidote, but just a good way to spend the off season was following cricket, because the cadences of the sport are similar, and I adore the sport. I think it is amazing. And I look at baseball fans like, oh, cricket's so confusing, I don't understand it. I'm like, it's simpler than baseball. It's really not complicated. What are you talking about? And then I talk to cricket fans, and they're all baseball fans. They're like, there's like this unrequited love here where like cricket fans adore baseball, and baseball fans like no clue about what cricket is. Oh my God. So yeah, I got this ball because I had actually no idea what a cricket ball felt like. I'd heard that it was similar to a baseball, and it is. It's smoother than a baseball, but it's about the same weight. It's almost exactly the same size.
Apparently, it still hurts when you get hit by one. So
both of them.
I wouldn't recommend.
When they hit you. Yeah. No, would not recommend at all. Playing silly in cricket, I do not understand it. Props to them.
I have to, because obviously it's great to talk about sport, but I think obviously I do have lots of questions about board games too. So I figure we'll try and steer it back onto board games. So when you first started designing games, because I've had this chat with people before, and I know that some people, actually I want to say a lot of people who play board games often feel compelled to design a board game as well. But there are certain people that kind of just don't feel that at all. They're like, I'd love playing games, but I just don't want to actually design them. I'm assuming, the designing part of your brain, did that come from playing games, or has that always been like a part of you, like the ability to design and create?
Oh, it always has been, because I was a video game fan growing up. Like, I loved video games, and I wanted to be a video game designer.
Cool.
So in my early 20s, I got programming books. I started trying to teach myself programming. The brainiac I was, I got a book in Visual Basic because apparently I thought Visual Basic would be a good programming language for games. Spoiler, it wasn't. And so while I did that, I'm like, well, I should really learn about game design also. Hey, I've got an idea. Why don't I start learning about board games? Because that way I could learn about game design without the programming, which is actually
Ah,
how they teach it in schools now. When you go to a game design class, and there were no game design classes when I was learning game design. Now all sorts of colleges offer game design classes, which I think is excellent. I teach one, as I
uh-huh.
mentioned. But I started playing board games, and I realized that I liked board games more than I liked video
Oh, wow.
games. But I still wanted to design, so the design part went with me from video games into board games, and I just stuck with designing board games. Now, it took me 10 years to make board games that were actually
Yeah.
playable, because actually, it was more like 5 years for board games that are actually playable, then 5 more years to start making games that are actually good. But again, there were some resources, but not a lot. Like there weren't classes, there weren't the Ludology didn't exist
Hmm.
back then. I was published by the time Ludology came out. By the time Jeff started broadcasting in, I think 2011 is when he
Hmm.
started. So, um, so now I see new designers coming into the space, and they are so much more advantaged than I am because they have all these resources, and they come in, they know exactly what to expect when
Hmm.
making a board game, which I knew a little bit, but it really took me a while to figure out where the
So
handle
it's
was.
funny you say because you came from a video game background, but from my understanding of your games, like I think I've played at least half of your games, and they don't feel like video games. So how were you able to take your sort of like passion for video games and sort of turn them into board games that like play really well? Like, did you feel like that was?
Well, the first thing is by the time I worked on those games, I was really kind of out of video games.
Oh, okay.
Another thing that pushed me out of video games is I just got sick of, like, number one, that so many of the games had the same look and presentation, and number two, that presentation was always like a half-naked woman
Hmm.
holding a huge gun, Even now, you look at modern AAA video games, and they're so focused on how realistic the blood splatters. Like, our blood coagulates so realistically. I'm like, I don't really need this. So to me, a lot of video games, they're not for me. I'm not interested in like
Hmm.
realistically modeling 450 kinds of guns. Like that has no interest to me whatsoever, and yet it seems to be a staple of so many AAA video games. So
I feel
I think another element of this is.
no, no.
Sorry,
I
you gonna
was
ask
gonna
something?
carry on.
Oh, sorry. So another aspect of it is the video games I did enjoy were the ones that were very
Hmm.
economic. So there was a game called Out of the Park Baseball that I do not allow myself to play
Too
anymore.
addictive.
I cannot play Out of the Park Baseball. Yeah, because it would be goodbye, everyone. I'd be gone. I just cannot stop playing it. It's really bad. It's an infinite jest situation where I just can't tear myself away. I have lost literal months to that game because the stories that emerge from it are so rich and so wonderful if you're a baseball fan. And for the UK fans over there, you can probably imagine if Championship
Mm,
Manager having a similar pull for a
yeah.
lot of people because that's the football equivalent. So yeah, also Roller Coaster
Hmm.
Tycoon was another game I absolutely loved. Um, and then a lot of adventure games. I loved Myst. I loved Grim
Ah,
Fandango.
yes, love that game.
I did, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so good. I did really love
Yeah.
Half-Life, but only playing with the cheat
Oh, okay.
codes. Which I'm glad that people are starting to come around to this idea of accessibility in video games because I just didn't like the actual gameplay of, again, the whole thing of number one, there's the whole thing of this game realistically models 450 kinds of guns. It's not something that interests me. And number two, I'm not very
Hmm.
dexterous. I have 10 thumbs, so I really am not very good at any games that demand even a slight amount of physical coordination. So platformers are like, nope, next. And half of the games that come out these days is this is a retro style Metroidvania kind of game, and it's like I mean, good for you. I'm sure your game is wonderful, but it's not for
Well,
me.
that's a great thing about both the board game and the video game industry is that they are growing so much now. Video games more, but they have something for everything. And just a classic example, just before the stream, I was watching Ross from More Games Please, and he was playing through a conversation simulator, which isn't as dry as it sounds. It's actually a story and narrative game with a deck building element, but the sort of like story is driven from the sort of like playing of cards. And I was just like, that's so unique, and you wouldn't really feel like that game could exist, back in the day. But because the industry is so large now, and there is almost like these niche audience become there's kind of big worthwhile audiences now, only in terms of like making an actual living out of making these kind of games, that you could create these kind of crazy, quirky things.
Yeah, there's also this weird dynamic that's happening between video games and board games. Jeff wrote about it at GDC a few years ago. He said the scoop from GDC is all video game designers want to make board games, and all board game designers want to make video games. That's really, I mean, we look across at the greener grass and we're like, board game, especially board game publishers are like, you mean you could just like hit a button and your game's published and you don't have to get quotes, you don't have to wait for shipping, and that's it. And meanwhile, video game folks are looking over and they're like, wait a second, you mean that you can actually talk to people when you play the game and you don't have to worry about patches, and once the game is out, it's out and you don't have to worry about it? And then board game people are like, oh, and you don't have to worry about reprints anymore. And video game people are like, well, you've got actual you've got an easy way of doing competition and your games don't go obsolete. And, there's so much to like envy on the other side. And when you have hybrids, those bring in the shortcomings of both worlds. So now you've got a game that's hard to maintain and that will probably be obsolete in 5 years when that
immediately
platform goes away.
my mind was drawn to Mansions of Madness as an example of a game where you create the physical components and it's driven by like tech. With the ability to sort of patch it afterwards and add new things that utilize the same components in different ways. I mean, Star Wars probably does that as well. It's like a cool idea. And I actually just wrote that down when we were talking earlier on, like how do you feel about the mixing of like analog and technology together in regards to board games?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's an interesting space, but it's an alternate space. It's a difficult space to work with. Only the larger publishers can do it because it takes so many resources. Like, seriously, making an app is really hard, both in terms of coding it and in terms of maintaining it. So that's why you only see the big publishers do it. So I think another game that does it really well is Chronicles of Crime. Like, that's a game that is absolutely amazing. And really leans into it and doesn't like use it as a gimmick, but it's a core part of gameplay is using that app. So that
I think that's a great example because it's taking those things down to sort of the bare components, but also they are very much multi-use. Like, for example, I know that they have like just documents or papers on one of the clue cards, and that could be interpreted as anything. So it's almost like giving you these abilities to sort of like create your own story, because they've released the community update for it as well, where you create your own stories. I think that's a phenomenal idea, and that's a good example of where they work. But I can see why, if it is so expensive to maintain an app and even create it in the first place, it's not really ideal. So I mean, I think I'm okay with it. I think I'm not sure how I would feel if it was just it was solely those two combined forever. Like, I wouldn't like to have to rely on technology to play a board game in like 5-10 years.
Won't happen. Simply not going to happen.
I will take your word on that. You are the expert in the field, so thank you for giving me the assurance there.
Now then, if you are a if you're a board game designer and you want to look into a very easy way to make your game app assisted. Like, let's say you want something that's effectively a deck of cards that's enhanced with a bit of memory with some variability, with all sorts of interesting things. Instead of like learning Unity, because Unity is a bear
Hmm.
to learn and it's a bear to maintain. Like I tried using Unity and it was like I could only work on it like every few months, and every time I looked at it, just enough had gotten updated that my whole build broke. And it took a few
Oh
days to
man.
fix the build. Then I left, and then I came back a few months later, and my build was broken again. It's madness. But if you don't want to do that, if you don't want to
Hmm.
chase that useless cycle, look into a platform called Twine,
Hmm.
Twine, which is an interactive fiction
Oh, okay.
platform that's choice based. So it's pretty much like it's kind of like HyperCard, if you
I
remember
don't,
HyperCard.
unfortunately.
You can uh, that's effectively what Myst was kind of built on, but Myst is totally visual.
Hmm.
Twine is completely text based. So it's like a text based hypercard where it's just a bunch of a text with links, and when you click on a link, that takes you to another part of the
Okay.
game. And you can have game states, you can have variables, and things like that. And it compiles. I'm getting a little technical here. Compiles to HTML5 as one of the outputs. Now, HTML5, it's going to have a
Hmm.
lifespan, probably in about 10 years or so, it's going to be gone. But 10 years is a
Hmm.
lot better than something if you're making it from like iOS. If you make something from iOS, maybe in 6 months, maybe in 12 months, you're going to need to update it because Apple's going to do something that breaks something. That's just the way that app
Well, that's a
development
good.
works.
That's a
So,
great
yeah,
tip.
yeah.
Twine, you said Twine. Okay, so if any budding
Yep,
game
yep.
designers are out there and they want to integrate app, like it sounds like that's the one to go with. So
Yeah, it's
So
worth
I know
looking
I
into.
mentioned to you earlier on. Oh yeah, and by the way, just in case anyone has just dropped in, feel free. I'm kind of saving questions from you guys towards the end of the stream, which is in about half an hour. So get those questions, write them down. We'd love to ask them to Gil, and it doesn't even have to be board game related. We talked a little bit about your kind of stepping into publishing and sort of kind of doing it yourself as you had a good analogy, and I've completely forgotten it, but yeah, basically, what I wanted to ask you about is you've recently you've had games that are released on Kickstarter. Have you ever
Mhm.
self-published or like had gone down the traditional route of publishing any of your games thus far? Because I know you set up Formal Ferret,
Uh, the only The only one I did was Teletime. That one I
the British one.
self-funded. But yeah, but I'm far too small a publisher to do it for anything larger. And at this point, right now, I need Kickstarter for just about anything. Just because I'm not releasing games at the pace that I quote
Hmm.
unquote should be. So I'm looking for ways to get around that. But on the other hand, I'm not going to release a game just because it's
Hmm.
time. Like I can't let the schedule dictate. Like I'm going to release a crappy game because that's when I need to monetize things. And also, I have a hard time selling other people's games. Like I have to sell my own games because it's me. If I sign somebody else's game, um, it just wouldn't be the same because it wouldn't be my game. So it doesn't feel right. Maybe someday I'll change that. Maybe someday I'll come across a game and be like, "Oh, this game's really good. I got to pick this one up." But I really like seeing other publishers, picking up those really good games and running with it. So yeah, I that's why I focus
Hmm.
on Kickstarter because right now I'm still at the point where I have to. Maybe someday I'll get big enough where I won't, but I'm going to need more
I
successes
think
to do
I think you're
that.
well on the way there. I mean, like how many? I think I was looking at the games earlier on, and because there's a few expansions in the mix as well. But in total, it looks like you've released 16 titles according to Board Game Geek. But that's including expansions as well. So that's quite a number. That's
Yeah, and I think that probably includes also games that are not Formal Ferret that came out before Formal Ferret existed, because Battle Merchants and
yes.
Prolix
Which
are also
Prolix
in
is
there.
that essentially a prequel to Wordsy? 'Cause certainly looked like So
It
it's very
is.
much the same
It
structure
is.
of the game, right? Okay.
Yes, but Wordsy is better in every
Fair
way.
enough. I mean, Wordsy's the one I've played, so it's probably no point going back and sourcing
Yes.
a copy of Prolix now, right? But
Don't bother unless you're
and I
morbidly
like the
curious.
presentation of Wordsy as well, looking like it comes in a book. Then that's quite neat. S-
I can I
yeah,
talk about that a little
absolutely.
bit because that was really interesting. I learned a lot about product design there because uh, like Prolix came out back when it was 2010, and to me the light bulb came on, I think, in
Mm-hmm.
2014. That's when like I said, oh, this is what game design is
Mm-hmm.
about, you know. And before then, like 2010, I was still thinking, well, let me take some mechanisms and put a theme on top of it, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what a game is. And that's not what a game is. A game is an experience that use incentives to guide
Mm-hmm.
players through. My core philosophy of game design is incentivize
Mm-hmm.
interesting behavior, and that I only realized that in 2014, 2015. So 2010, I had no idea. Furthermore, product design, I had no idea about anything either. And Z-Man, Zev, who was running Z-Man at the time, asked me, "Do you want to handle like the art direction? Because I have no idea what to do." And I said, "Sure." And the artist said, "What should I do?" I'm like, "Oh, I just do some splotches of color because I
Mm-hmm.
can't think of anything." And he did splotches of color, and it looked great on the monitor. And he put like "Great for Game Night" on the cover, which people needled me for relentlessly. But the worst part is people looked at this game with splotches of color on the cover, and the name was Prolix, and they had no
Mm-hmm.
idea what it was. Like they did not know what kind of game it was, even though it said
Yeah.
word game on the cover. Like it literally said word game. People did not know it was a word game. Wordsy does not say it's a word
Mm-hmm.
game on the cover. It just says it's a game. But people immediately know it's a word game because it looks like an old dictionary. And so that's how much I learned about the title gives you a clue of what the
Mm-hmm.
game's about. The presentation gives you an idea of what the game's about. And it is so important as a designer and a publisher that you
Mm-hmm.
cash that check. That when people look at your game on the shelf or they see it on the table and sit down and play it, that it is exactly what
Yeah.
they expect. You do not want to surprise people because that leads to dissonance, and that dissonance needs to be
Mm-hmm.
overcome.
So a lot learned from that game. You can definitely sense um, your own style, I would say as well, because I know that from playing the networks, which by the way has a great graphical kind of graphical style, and that it's really like unique to you. I like that, and then I can kind of see elements of the UI of the game itself reflected in High Rise as well. When you come to look at the actual the board, because I noticed that thing. Like,
Yep,
I mean, obviously, I would say probably a designer would never say that they're where they want to be in terms of creating a game. But do you feel that progress? Can you see that progress as a designer? Like, isn't it?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, I can. I think High Rise is the best thing I've done so far. In terms of board games, I want to like just really quick to my previous
Yeah.
point about Wordsy. I want to give a shout out to Amber Cook who helped me with the name. She was like she really helped me with the name. Like, what should I call it? I don't want to call it Prolix. And she's like, well, what's it about? I'm like, it's about words. And she's like, why don't I call it Wordy? And I didn't want to call it Wordy, but I called it
So.
Wordsy instead. And I think that's such a better name for it. And Amber was a big person behind that. She really knows her. Sometimes marketing is just like learning enough to like strip out all the assumptions, and that's why she's so
Awesome.
good at it. And as far as you talk about the consistent look between the networks and High Rise, and that's all Heiko Gunther. He did graphic design for both games. So when I was going to publish the
Mm-hmm.
networks, this is kind of an embarrassing story to tell. I spent a good amount of time thinking of what graphic designer could do a job like Heiko because I really liked his Glory to Rome black
Mm-hmm.
box. I liked all the stuff he did. Then I realized I could just ask Heiko. So I reached out to him. He had no idea who I was. And he's like, sure, we'll have a meeting. And we had a meeting. And he was. So it turns out what happened. You talked about its unique style. A couple of years beforehand, some of you folks may remember Cambridge Games Factory. They did the original version of Glory to Rome, the one that looked
Okay.
kind of ugly. Um, like if you ever Google pictures of Glory to Rome, look for the old Cambridge Games
Gonna
Factory.
write it down.
If you want to see something absolutely shocking and horrifying, like the art is just
Is it?
breathtakingly bad.
I was gonna say,
Because
is it worse than? Is it Roads and Boats? Is that's kind of notoriously known as quite a bad um, game?
I mean, Roads and Boats at least is neutral. If you looked at they did a sort of a quote unquote light version of Roads and Boats. Splotter did called Cannes,
Mm-hmm.
like the French city, and that I think
Okay.
is up there. I'm friends with the folks at water, by the way, so I don't want to give them too much of a hard time. But Cambridge Games Factory came out
Hmm.
with Blur to Rome with absolutely ugly art, and Heiko at the time was a graphic designer who liked board games. He's like, I could probably do a better job, and he did the black box version. He put it on Board Game Geek. Cambridge Games Factory reached out, said, "Hey, how about we release your game?" And then they did the infamous Blur to Rome black box, which took a couple of years to fulfill because they promised free worldwide shipping. And then the guy who owns Cambridge Game Factory
Oh
had to
wow.
sell his house and effectively shut down the company. I think officially, legally, the entity still exists, but you will not be able to get the rights to Blur to Rome for any amount of money for them, for the English language
Sorry,
rights, that
such a
is.
shame.
That's why there's no, yeah. It's such a shame because the game is so wonderful. World rights are still available, but that's why Matai and I exists, because it's the closest thing we
Ah,
can get
I
to
was
Blur to
actually just
Rome in
gonna say,
English.
I
Yeah,
thought
so
there was
I,
like a chance that the game could be sort of rehashed in an almost similar way, but not so close. I find it actually
yep.
weird. I'm not sure what the rules are, but I know that it's really hard to copyright like gameplay. So yeah.
Yeah, you can't
Mm.
copyright mechanisms. You can patent them, but that's a
Hmm.
really tough road to go down. I'm
Yeah.
not a lawyer, by the way. But let me get back
Yeah.
to the Heiko story. So let's go to that time just before Cambridge Games Factory went under. They were going to publish a card game version of Traumfabrik, which you might know was Reiner Knizia's
Hmm.
excellent auction games about movies. It was re-released at one point as Hollywood Blockbuster, and then as Dream Factory, which is Traumfabrik in English. And of course, I'm totally screwing up the German pronunciation, so German viewers, please forgive me. Um, so, so they were going to do a card game version of it, and Heiko had found this artist named Travis Kinchy, who did this really interesting style that was kind of
Hmm.
cartoony, but didn't look silly. And they were really, really excited about it. And then Cambridge Games Factory went under, and they're like, well, poop. We have this great graphical approach, we had this great theme, and it's gone. And then, like a year later, here comes this, like, I don't want to say unknown because I had a couple of
Hmm.
games under my belt, but this random um, board game designer who's got a Kickstarter about a game
Hmm.
about TV, and Heiko's like, wait a second, and then he reached out to Travis, and Travis like, oh yeah, sure, I'll work on that, and that's how that
Oh.
came to be, because Heiko realized that he and Travis could repurpose that approach for the networks, and my
Hmm.
gosh, did it work! I'm so lucky that it
Well,
worked out that
it's
way.
honestly it's such a nice like quirky game as well. I actually remember being at the show when the networks came out because I remember like because there's another question I was going to ask you about running because cons. You've been to a lot of cons now, conventions, expos, example. Like I
Yep,
wanted to ask you what
yep.
sort of like your typical experiences in a con, like in brief, obviously, because we're actually speeding through the time here. But like, how do you enjoy them still? Like, are they haven't hopefully haven't become like a chore to you? Like, how do you feel?
I I
Okay.
love conventions. I love, 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 love conventions. I always do. Ever since my first convention, I'm like, I could do this every
Nice.
day. So I love meeting people. I love playing games. The only problem I have with conventions now is fatigue.
Yeah.
Uh, the pro- I It's especially nowadays. It's a
Yeah.
lot of work. So um, a typical day is I usually
Yeah.
work the morning shift. So usually the halls open at 10 a.m. So I'm usually at the booth at
Hmm.
about 9:30, except for that one time at SNY I overslept on the first day.
Let's
But
not
let's
talk.
not
No.
talk about that. Um, that was funny. So that was great. But then so I work the morning shift. I usually have a good number of people with me. Sometimes I stay in the same room with them. Other times I give my staff as cheap a room as I can get that's within range of
Hmm.
like public transit, and then I take the room that's closer just because that room tends to be twice as expensive. And if I got it for them, I'd be
Yeah.
out of business, which kind of stinks, but it's kind of what you have to do sometimes as a publisher, you
Hmm.
have to make those calls. And I need one room close to me because I need to be able to like run back
Yeah.
and forth and get stuff. Um, so I meet everybody at the booth. We bring out new stock. I usually don't demo games because I usually want to be the person handling sales and exceptions. So a sale being like, I'm going to take your money, obviously. An exception being, hey, I wanted to talk to you. You're Gil Hova, right? That
That
sort of
was
thing.
me at one of your
And
conventions,
then
I
if there's
swear.
Awesome. I'm glad. I'm really glad about that. And I love it. I love meeting people. I love talking to them about my games. I love introducing them to my games. But in terms of like actually demoing the game, that takes like a different context. Like you have to sort of be in this focus. And I don't want people going up to them asking random things while they're in the focus of running a demo. I don't want them context switching. I want them focusing on the demo. And then I handle like, I'm sort of the shield against all that stuff. So I do that until about 2 o'clock,
Yeah.
about half the day. Then I have lunch, and then I'm free. Like I can take a
Wow.
nap, or if something like Gen Con, I usually can't take a nap. At Gen Con, I'm usually booked with interviews and meetings or seminars and panels. A lot of times at Gen Con, I'm spending the rest of the time demoing my new game. So I've got events for my new game, that sort of thing. And then the evening, I've usually got some event that I'm rushing off to. But every once in a while at a convention, I'll actually get to play a game, and it's amazing. Like maybe I've got
My
3 or
God,
4 hours
that
to do
must be
so.
like such precious time for you as well. And actually, off the back of that, I wanted to ask you because I know some designers don't actually get to play a lot of games, but do you still feel like you have enough time to play a lot of games? And I'm specifically asking about games that you haven't designed because I'm sure you play your own ones quite a lot.
I don't have enough time, and it's terrible. I'm especially now where we have the double whammy. It's not just not having time; it's that there's
Yeah.
this virus going around. So I'm hopefully like I just as you may have seen in recent news, I just had a lot of work lifted off my plate. So I was running the board game track at Origins Online. Sorry, the board
Gotcha.
game
Yes,
design
yes,
track
yes. Yeah.
at Origins Online. So I'm not doing that anymore for obvious reasons. Origins Online got canceled. And so I'm because of that, I've got a little more free time now. So hopefully, I can arrange like a Tabletopia
I was going
session
to ask
with
what's your
some friends.
preferred one, but I actually use Tabletopia. I've hit Tabletop Simulator, but it's just the fact that Tabletopia is free to play. I mean, there's restrictions within it, but Tabletop Simulator is like a cost to play, and I still have plenty of games that can work over sort of remote play, and also.
I actually use both. For prototypes, I actually use Tabletop Simulator. I find it faster to iterate in Tabletop Simulator than in Tabletopia. But I think for playing games, so far with what I've done, I've enjoyed playing games a little more in Tabletopia. I think the experience is just a lot smoother in Tabletopia than Tabletop Simulator. I also have friends in Tabletopia. Hi, Mark. So I really enjoy working with them, and they're really, really good to work with. Whereas Tabletop Simulator is very hard to get a hold of. Like, if they haven't heard of you, they will not work with you, and that's
that is a
a real
shame.
shame. It is. Like, they offer DLC, but it's a "don't call us, we'll call you" kind of thing, and you can't monetize mods. Which means that if you can't make money off of Tabletop Simulator as a publisher. And keep in mind, that's not like I'm not saying make money as in I need a 15th car, so I should get this revenue stream. I mean more as in, gosh, it sure would be nice to have some extra money for groceries.
For even people playing your game. Like, I think there was this whole, I don't know if you observed it on Twitter, but there was quite an interesting discussion I had. While I got involved, I inserted myself into the discussion with James Wallace, who's a designer as well. And he was basically arguing that designers should have compensation or at least recognition, because as it stands right now, there is no official format or thing in place where designers or even publishers are not credited when their games are played on like online streaming. And so that's quite an interesting discussion to be had. I don't want to sort of go into it because it was actually quite a long, it's sort of like intense discussion, because I think there's a lot of things to consider when you're thinking about that. But obviously, certainly it's kind of, I think we all came to the agreement that it's absolutely like mandatory when you are playing somebody's game on a stream, like I do streams of games. I would certainly credit the designer and the publisher, because I think if people want to play that game, they should at least be able to access it.
Yeah, furthermore, I'm going to be hitting Twitch hopefully soon
Cool.
with my own channel, where I'm going to play my own games. But I'm also going to play games I enjoy. But out of morals and ethics, most of the games that I play are going to be on Tabletopia, because Tabletopia compensates its publishers. Like every game on Tabletopia, there's a contract behind that game. Publishers given permissions, publishers given rights, publishers submitted the art, and the publisher gets paid.
Is that every time it gets played they get paid? Do you know that? Or is that I mean, is that not really your wheelhouse? But just wondering if you knew.
It is my wheelhouse, but that's up to the contract, which I don't feel like it's in my place to disclose.
I was being a bit cheeky there.
But the no worries. But the 30,000-foot view is, yes, publishers get compensated on Tabletopia. That's good to know. Whereas Tabletop Simulator, most of the mods on Tabletop Simulator, and mods and DLC are two different things. DLC is made by Tabletop Simulator headquarters, and you have to buy it. Whereas mods are made by anyone, and you don't have to buy them. So most of the mods on Tabletop Simulator are not made by the publishers. Now, there's a really long discussion here. Like, there's a lot of people who feel that it's not that big a deal, that ultimately it helps, that it doesn't cannibalize sales. There's other people who feel that, no, the publisher should get something. I mean, for me, it really depends on who you are as a publisher. Like, I'm at the size now where any sort of play and recognition of my game is incredibly valuable. Like, if you're Asmodee and you're talking about Seven Wonders, I think you're big enough that you might have an argument like that say this is legitimately sucking money out of our pockets, which that's their decision to make. But I think it's fair to say that Tabletop Simulator makes it hard for publishers to make that decision. Like, they put it entirely in the hands of the community, which can be good, or it could be really, really, really bad. And that sort of lack of control, I
think there's some good points made there, and I would definitely like to, get involved in a discussion or like learn more about this. But I think, because unfortunately we've only got about 10 minutes left of the stream, and I have like a quick game that I wanted to play with you, being that.
And I'm out of hot cocoa,
so
of course. We gotta wrap up.
You only have a limited window when you're drinking like hot cocoa before it goes too cold. Yes. So we'll get to questions in just a couple of minutes, but you still have time to ask them if you want. Just write them in the chat. Because I have been collecting all of the questions that have been asked so far, and there was a couple of questions that were asked outside of the stream as well, so I'll ask those. But now let's get to the game. Now we'll call it the Giggle, because obviously we're Chits and Giggles, and the Chits like the strategic part and the Giggles the fun part. So hopefully this will be fun game for you to partake in. Now, I'm really disappointed with myself, because I knew when I was going to talk to you, because Wordsy was the first game that I ever played, and I think I played it, if not with you, like on your stand when you were there. I think it was the first game I ever played of yours. So I wanted it to be a word game, and I was racking my brain. I really wanted to come up with a really clever one. And I had a clever idea, but I just couldn't make it work. So I'm going to play the sort of like more basic version of this game, all right? But I will kind of...
Word games are hard. Word games are really hard.
I thank you.
Don't beat yourself up.
That's made me feel better. But I will explain the game, and I'll kind of run it in the way it was. But there's like... Anyway. So basically, the original form of this game was... I'm going to give you trivia questions about board games. So anything to do with board game industry, these questions are all just answers, which hopefully be similar. But the answers I'm going to give you in the form of like... I'm going to give you some initials. So the game is called Winitials. So you feel free to use that as if you ever come up with another word game, and you can feel free to use that title. But yeah, basically I'm going to give you initials, and you're going to then answer the question, but that's kind of going to be all like helpline. You'll know what the answer begins with. So it's kind of like a very basic game. But I did it quite neat. So basically, going to come up on the screen for the audience at home, but I'm just going to name the two questions I did come up with, which is kind of the format I wanted to do, is I'm going to use your own games as a help, because I'm putting on the screen now the name of a game, High Rise, as an example question. And the question would be, which designer recently created a game about skyscrapers, and the answer is going to be some of the letters in order in that answer. So high rise, looking high rise, two, I've already kind of told you this, but two of the letters next to each other are the answer, the initials of the answer. But obviously, the answer is Hova. So that's the way I wanted it to work. Okay. So you see, like HIGH are the answers. Yep. So yeah, it's a bit complicated. Yep. As I said, I was racking my brain, so I didn't have enough time to form the actual how the game works in my head. But I'm going to give you the one of them one anyway, because I think it's quite neat. So on the screen now is the last one that I actually came up with before I ran out. But in the networks, okay, some of the letters in the order are going to be the answer to this question. Which prolific game designer came up was designed the game Blue Lagoon?
That would be RK, Reiner Knizia.
There we go, Reiner Knizia. So there we go, you have it. See, I'm always scared when I play games with designers, because I know that they don't often get a lot of chance to play other games, and as a result, their knowledge isn't always always as much as people who play games. But then some people probably know more, obviously, for various reasons. But I'm always a bit scared. I don't want to kind of trip people up or anything. So the rest of them, I'm just going to have to, unfortunately, just give you the initials. So these are just kind of questions that I came up with myself. So so you're already 1 point though, so you're doing well. So the second question is, which SW is a brand that's featured thrice in the board game top 100.
SW is a board game brand.
Is a brand.
Oh, that would be Star Wars.
Yes.
Right?
That's kind of simple, right? Because I obviously that's I wanted to say it was the most, but I wasn't 100% sure, because I know they're like Lord of the Rings is in there and got quite, but yeah, it's one of the most prolific ones for sure.
I almost overthought that one really badly.
Well, SW, I immediately think Star Wars anyway, so I was like, maybe that's going to help. Okay, so we've got another question for you. This is another one based on the top 100 of Board Game Geek. What B is a game with 2 entries in the top 100?
B? Mm-hmm. B as in boy?
B, yes. B for Bravo.
And it's just one letter, right?
It's the letter B, but the word begins with B.
Yes, but it's not 2 letters. It's not like SW is 2 letters and 2 words.
That's right, yes.
It's simply one letter, just going to expand to one word.
But you've got to think, there's something like, okay, so technically it's B colon.
I already know the answer.
Okay.
I'm just working. But it's the top what?
Well, it's a game with 2 entries in the top 100.
Okay, that's easy. That's Brass.
Yeah, Brass. Have you played that, by the way?
Oh, I love Brass.
So good.
Absolutely love Brass. I've only played the new version. I've only played Birmingham twice so far, but I really enjoy it.
It's such a convoluted mix of things, and yet it's really hard to get your head around when you first play it. But it's great. So satisfying when you get it. Yeah,
I explain it as 3 games in one. Like there's three. You're playing 3 games simultaneously, and they all interlock. It's such a brilliant design.
I have only one more question for you, and this question is, what RS are the initials of which famous Canadian video content creator?
Well, of course, that's none other than Prince Edward Island's very own Rodney Smith.
Rodney Smith, that's right, yeah. There we go. So sorry, the game, I really feel disappointed, because I usually like to, like I said, finally craft these games, and just fortunately, just because the word game, as you said, creating a word game is difficult. So obviously I just messed it up. Really, but there was something of a game in there.
No,
if I had more time on it, hopefully I would have. But maybe could invite you back, and then I promise you. You will get a full word-based giggle game out of me, and that's a guarantee. Okay, so thanks for taking part. You actually dominated that game, so you totally won that. But it's time to move on to the questions. So we had a couple of questions in the stream earlier on. Somebody asked, I think it was not yet again asked. Has that, because we were talking earlier on about like fandoms and stuff, but it says, has that out of control distaste played into how you design games, like less mechanics or something?
Oh, I've never thought of it that way. I don't think it has, as a cursory look, but I gotta chew on that a little more and see if there's anything deeper to it. Like from a surface level, I don't think it has. And lately, the games I've been making, the prototypes I've been making, have been very thematic, very theme first and very experience first. So it's funny. My friend Mary Flanagan tried to call me out on a recent Ludology interview, saying that my games were mainly mechanical. And she's right in terms of the games that she had play tested when she was in my playtest group, like maybe 5 or 6 years ago. She since went on to publish Monarch, design and publish Monarch and Visitor in Blackwood Grove and a whole bunch of really amazing games. And she's been doing game design for a very long time. She's just only started with board games, but she's been doing game design for a while. But I had this sort of reputation of being mainly mechanical, and I've been doing a lot more thematic stuff lately.
Yeah, no, I've noticed. I mean, I just really like that. I mean, I remember playing High Rise at the last show that we were. I'm just checking because I'm worried that my microphone is making noises, so that's why I was fiddling around. But
you sound
fine. Okay, fine. Okay, good.
You sound fine. I've not heard any sort. I know what like a failing snowball sounds like.
Okay, that's good. I was just panicked. But I mean, to be fair, if you wanted to digest on that, and then maybe like I could, maybe you could tweet me, and then we can just mention that, because that'd be a nice kind of thing to think about afterwards. In case you had like a thing, but that's quite cool. That's a good question, actually. Thanks again. That was not yet again. Somebody else asked, Crummy Master said, is there an unreleased board game you're looking forward to that isn't one of your own? No.
I like I said before, I have a hard time selling games that are not my own.
But in terms of not in terms of selling though, but in just like wanting to try. Yeah.
Wanting to play? Oh, okay. Sorry, I totally misunderstood the question. I've gotten to play test for Tessa's trick-taking game, Wicked and Wise, several times, and every time I play it, it gets better. It is such a wild and weird trick-taking game.
What's it called?
So, for Tessa's a relatively new game designer. She has a game that Weird Giraffes is going to be releasing. Wicked and Wise. Cool. It's a trick-taking. Yes, it's a trick-taking game that is, right now it's for 4 players, and only 2 of the players are playing a trick-taking game. The other 2 players are feeding the cards to the trick-taking players.
Okay.
It is so weird, and it's so awesome. So that's a game that is unreleased, but really good. So that's one that's really good. Heiko has a prototype that he put up on Board Game Geek called Black Box that I really enjoyed. Right now he's framing it as a generic Eurogame simulator, but I think he should theme it as more of a holodeck. Okay. Like, this is a game about a holodeck. I think but in terms of like gameplay, it's really, really good. Heiko is a graphic designer, but he's also a game designer, and Black Box really brings the goods. I really enjoy that. My friend Daniel Newman, close to home, has a bunch of really amazing games. There is one that's going to be coming out soon called Watch, the name is really clever on several levels, and the game's really good also. He has a game called Astrolabe that's going to be coming out that's under contract as well. He's trying to find a home for his game No One Lives Forever, and he has a game called Grand Necropolis Railway that he's shopping to publishers now. And Grand Necropolis
the good news
Railway
is I follow him on Twitter, so I think I may have even heard him talking about at least one of those games you mentioned, but that's awesome. We are running close to the end of the time, but I just wanted to ask a game that Monique, Game Freak Game Girl, she asked earlier on in Ross's stream, because I don't think she could make this one, but she asked that if you could, and this is a non-board game related question, but if you could turn into any animal, what would it be? I think
come on.
I think she wanted to hear you say it.
Come on, people. I had.
Yeah.
Can you folks
I'll
give me 1
vamp. I'll
second
vamp.
while I
Don't
walk
worry.
away for 1 moment?
In case you don't know, Gil actually the name. I don't think I even mentioned it, but the name of Gil's sort of like company that he publishes his games under is Formal Ferret. So I feel like you might know what's coming up here. But to be honest, I'll take any chance of getting like a cute animal on the stream. So I'm totally going to let him take time to do this. I mean, you are running slightly over, so I hope if you are still watching, like I'm just going to get that last question in. Oh my God, look.
Yeah, yeah, she's
Oh
kind
no,
of
we
cut
can
off
definitely see her. Don't worry.
by the
What's her
background,
name?
by the virtual background. But her name is
Trillion.
Trillion is her name. Um, yes, from
Nice.
as in
Oh my
Hitchhiker's Guide.
God.
Here's a nice look
She's
at her.
quite calm.
She's our,
Like it's quite calm.
she's quite
My
what?
knowledge of ferrets is they're quite a
Well,
like a hyper kind of animal, but maybe I'm completely under and like I don't know.
they have various personalities. I've had ferrets who are very, very calm and relaxed. I have ferrets who are very, very crazy and uptight. I always have two at a time. Trillian is 7 years old, which is pretty old for a ferret. So she used to be quite crazy back in her day, but now she's pretty
Oh,
happy
she's
to just
lovely.
hang out
Like
with me.
and is so that was, I mean, a
Yeah.
fairly obvious answer, but it's good that you've so there we go. Monique, if you're watching this back, there we go, now you have the official answer.
Yep.
Crimmy Master asked me a question which is very unusual, asked what animal I'd like to be, and I had an answer to this. There's an animal on some island somewhere which has like absolutely no natural predators, so they like approach humans, and I'd like to be one of those. I'd love to be an animal where I just have no natural predators, because living in fear is just not something I'm up for. So yeah, thanks for that question. So I mean, I would ask it to you, but I've already asked it to you. So
Today I learned, Russ, that you are an
there we
apex
go.
predator.
I've learned that's the name for it. So listen, we have to wrap up because we actually come to the end of the time. We're actually over a little bit. But listen, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the stream, because honestly, you've been really lovely. I know that I've bumped into you in conventions, and you were even kind enough to participate in a board game knockout video that we did about sort of like things. I don't even know if you remember that, but it did. Unfortunately, it didn't. But the video actually ended up corrupting, so I couldn't actually finish that project. But the good news is that there will be conventions happening again, and I know you're going to be at least one of them. So we will redo it. We will get you on one of the other board game knockout videos, so we'll make up for that hopefully. But
yeah. I should be at the digital version of UK
I'm
Games
looking forward
Expo.
to that, because they seem to really be keen on making it more than just the sort of playing games online. They want it to be like an online lobby kind of thing. So I'm really curious to see what they're going to do with that. Is there anything you'd like to plug? Games, Twitter, anything you want?
Well, I'm on the Ludology podcast, ludology.net, with Emma Larkins and Scott Rogers. Fantastic co-hosts. I can't do it without them. And Jeff Engelstein, of course, contributes, and he's one of the people who started it, along with Ryan Sturm. I have High Rise coming out on the 1st of July. And the Dice Tower just gave it a glowing review, which was relief is how I felt. Although Tom had told me in advance that he really liked the game, so I knew that it was going to be a positive review, but I wasn't expecting it to be that positive. You know, I was expecting it to be like, but no, there were no yeah buts in the other than. He didn't like the full game. He didn't like the 3-round game. I actually prefer the 3-round game. I think the 3-round game is better, but the 2-round game is still very, very, very good. And I put it in because I couldn't decide. I was like, some people like the 3-round game.
Well, lucky you did,
isn't it? The 2-round game. There's just I'll leave it up to the players. Yeah. But Tom prefers the 2-round game, and it's a good. It's a really good way to play the game. What else? I keep an eye on my Twitter for when I release info about my Twitch stream, and you'll get to see me play my games online with my friends. That's going to be, it's mainly going to be High Rise, Weird Stories, which is my upcoming role-playing game. And I also, so you're going to get to see that played online. and also
Yes.
networks executives, which I don't feel has gotten enough attention. So I want people to see like networks executives being played because it brings so much to the networks. It's really a great way to play it. And then I'm also going to be playing other games that I love that I didn't make. Games like Brass. One of my favorite games in the world is De Vulgara Eloquentia. So
I've never heard of that.
Tabletopia has it. So I am looking for. Oh, it's so good! It's so good. So
I'll be
I'm
following
looking
you
forward
on
to playing
Twitch.
that as
Don't
well.
worry.
Yep. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at Hova. That's probably the best place to follow me. And that's about.
I mean,
that.
just from wrapping up, then there was so much I realized because I've got like a list of things that I would ask you, and I didn't even get to half of them. So there's ample opportunity to bring you back on the show sometime and finish up the conversation.
Yeah. I didn't even mention check-in cards, which is my new safety tool for games, and I'm about to release physical components of that. But that's something I'm really proud of. Is a way for gamers to communicate with each other before they play the game.
I've seen that, and that's actually a really nice idea. So like, kudos to you on that. I'm just gutted. We could bring you back. I'm happy to do that. So in the future we'll do that, and that'll be great. We'll wrap it up there then. Thank you so much for watching. I should do my own plug, just if you're not following already. I know probably most of you are at this point, but there's a little follow button above the screen when you exit, so click on that. As I said, I'm also raising donations, so even if the ad that you watched before you watched the stream, that'll help me, and that money will go towards Black Lives Matter charities. If you want to follow me, you know where I am, on the details are on the bottom there, and a website, and I'm on Patreon as well. Thank you so much, Gil, again for your time. It was been a great chat. Hopefully we'll get you back on the show again in the future, but until the next time, take care, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.